Okay, kids, it's time for another episode of the Fueled by Weird podcast, the podcast that never lets go before the ref counts to five. Holy cow. I'm Chris Daly, and today I have the pleasure of chatting with the king of wrestling comics, Mike Kingston. Mike, how's it going, man?
Good, good. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for coming. We were talking before. I've been a longtime fan of yours, so I'm very excited to finally get to talk to you in person. I'm very, very excited this is happening.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited too.
Very cool. All right, man. So I usually like to start these things off with an icebreaker question. So today's icebreaker question, the zombie apocalypse is coming. Who are three people you want to have on your zombie apocalypse team?
Is like real humans or
Whoever, doesn't matter.
uh hmm. I mean, I feel like, you'd want the human torch
Okay.
as a given.
That's a
Um
good one.
that's definitely one. And then I would say maybe poison ivy to, if we had to grow some food.
Okay.
And then maybe the blob, if we got to eat somebody.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I went a little bit different and I kind of just went a bunch of heavies just to kind of keep me safe. Um Marcus Phoenix from Gears of War. I mean, he's got
Okay.
lots of experience in killing, zombies and monsters, so I figured that was a good one. Brody King, because he's a giant, giant dude, and I just feel like if I was around him, I'd feel a lot more safe. And
It's fair.
Terry Crews, because I always heard that if you're going to be in a zombie apocalypse, Terry Crews is someone you want on your side. So,
It's a good team. Oh, it's a good team.
yeah, I didn't very go practical. I just went, who's a bunch of guys who could protect me because I'm kind of a wuss. So I think that was the way I went.
It's interesting that none of us picked anybody from The Walking Dead. Arguably the most experienced of the zombie killers.
That's true. I'm sure if you were asked really anybody else, Negan or Daryl would definitely be on the team for sure. I almost thought about Negan, I'm not gonna lie, but I had to go with Terry Crews.
Yeah, that's and he's a wonderful painter, so you could have some art.
That's true. Keep you entertained. All right, man. So, with the concept of the show Fueled by Weird, I kind of take it as, all your hobbies or interests, they come together to make you who you are as a person, and essentially what makes you the weirdo that you are. So, in addition to comic books, what other kind of things are you into? What
Hmm.
hobbies do you have?
Uh, I had a lot more hobbies before I started making comic books. My life is a lot more just ruled by deadlines and wrangling artists and wrestlers and whatnot. Obviously, I watch wrestling all the time still, and some for work, some for enjoyment. Um, I when I have the chance, I mean, I like to obviously I travel for my show, so I like to see things. I like to experience stuff. I like I used to hike all the time, which I just don't have that kind of time anymore.
Sure.
I used to like video games. I mean, the last video game system I had was an Xbox 360, which is unfortunate
Yeah,
because I'm sure I've missed a ton of great games. But I'm a real completist, so like once I turn something on, like I got to play till I win, and it can kind of take over my life.
yeah, I get that.
I think the only thing that would get me out of retirement would be if they made a new Bioshock game. That would probably do it.
Dude, those are so good. I actually heard one's coming. And it may not
I've heard one's I've heard one's been coming for years, but
that's true. I
that's
I
the that's
I
the
heard
one.
I heard the most recent one was it might not be a BioShock game, but it's made by the same guys and it's going to kind of be a spiritual successor. So if it ends up not being BioShock, it's definitely going to be BioShock adjacent. But either
Right.
way, I'm super here for it.
So I love Left for Dead, but I didn't come back for the spiritual successor to that. That
Dude.
was it, Back for Blood or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, and
Yeah,
I'm with you. Left for Dead, I spent so many hours on that game.
I used to play it with different wrestlers. I used to play with Hurricane, and I'd be in like chat rooms or whatever in the rooms with the guys, and it
Oh, that's so
was a lot of fun.
That's so rad. And yeah, like you mentioned with wrestling, I'm kind of a fan myself. I got my Hangman Bullet Club shirt on today. Yeah, I watch a ridiculous amount of wrestling, and I'm so excited though because of all the episodes of podcasts I've done, I've only briefly got to talk about wrestling. So today I get to talk all about wrestling, and I'm so, so excited because no one ever wants to hear me talk about wrestling. So I'm very excited to talk to someone who's got the same kind of crazy wrestling obsession that I do.
Surprising because usually the comic types are very wrestling, very interested in wrestling.
I mean, there's been some like, I've talked to Daniel Warren Johnson and he's pretty big into wrestling, and I've talked to a few others. We talk a lot of AEW stuff, but their comics don't necessarily they don't cross over as much into wrestling like yours do.
Sure, no, I don't think anybody's do really.
That's true. You kind of got a good thing going. It's you got a certain niche, and I really like it. But
I appreciate that.
so when it comes to writing, what was it initially that got you inspired to become a writer in the first place?
Um, I mean, I love comics my whole life, and the comic I always tell people that made me want to write wrestling or write comics was Concrete. Uh, I think Paul Chadwick is the best and probably never get anywhere near the credit that he deserves. Concrete, Think Like a Mountain, completely redefined in my eyes what comic books could be. Um, because I think everybody's journey through fandom is very similar. Where you start, you get hooked in by the big, splashy stuff, right? Like Hulk Hogan draws people into wrestling, and Spider Man, Superman, whatever, Batman draw people into comics, and then if you really if you get really really into it, you're sort of inspired by you start to get inspired by the craftsman, right?
Yeah,
And that's when you start to fall in love with other folks that other folks that are doing great things. Like I think it just takes a like you just get deeper and deeper into it, and that's really sort of my journey through wrestling and comics, where you know I was watching WWE, and then I'm into it, and then you kind of get burned out a little bit, and then like at the time in like 2004 or five, I discovered Ring of Honor, fell in love with it, and then that sort of pushes you in a whole different direction. And it's the same with comics and indie comics. I mean, I don't read a ton of superhero books anymore. I mean, I don't have time to read a lot of comics anymore, so I really
yeah,
have to make a concerted effort. I don't have a lot of time to do anything that's like it really just engages my brain. Like I can put on wrestling and work and kind of catch it. You know what I mean? Catch the
yeah,
bulk of it, but I'm not. And that you lose some of it because you're not. Sometimes you miss some story beats that are told in the matches,
yeah.
but yeah, so Paul Chadwick made me want to write comics, and then just the sort of dearth of good wrestling comics made me want to make wrestling comics. I just know that anytime I bought a wrestling comic, I didn't enjoy it, and I just didn't feel like people. I didn't feel like the people that were making them were fans, and
I get that.
I think you can always kind of tell when you consume something entertainment wise, whether you can almost always tell whether it's made for love or whether it's made for money. And the example I always use is Deadpool, right? Like they did the Wolverine Origins Deadpool. They're like, oh, Deadpool's in the movie. They made him different and in a way that wasn't, what the character was. And then Ryan
Yeah,
Reynolds obviously had an affection for the character, wanted to do it the right way, and now they're making billions.
yeah.
So it's so I always felt like I had that was sort of the thing that started for me. I'd say reading Concrete and then sort of being exposed to Ring of Honor and Joe and Punk and Sammy and Kevin and those guys really kind of just just redefined my whole worldview of wrestling and comics. And a couple years later, we had Headlock.
That's so awesome. And, like they always say, if you can't find what you're looking for, you should always just go out and make it yourself. And I really appreciate that you did that because, a lot of people they'll have this idea like, well, I don't want to make this idea because, no one's going to read it. But it's like you decided to say, forget that because there's going to be somebody out there that wants a wrestling comic because like you said, a lot of other wrestling comics, and I've had that experience too, where you'll read a comic, it's not really a wrestling comic, but it has wrestling in it. And you can tell that, they don't really know more than just kind of the basic stuff that everybody knows. And they just kind of put wrestling in there so they can say, hey, my comic has wrestling in it. But yours, you really take the time to kind of get to know the subject. I mean, you're already a fan yourself, so you can put little things in here and there that, really the hardcore fans are going to grab onto. And that's something that's really special about your books.
Well, and the other thing that's cool is a lot of the artists that I work with are trained wrestlers. Headlock, the
Oh my.
artist on Headlock is Mikel Molopolo, who's a Samoan wrestler in New Zealand, who former tag champ with Haku, who's a comic book artist, and
Yeah.
then Doug Hills, who does a lot of the Tales from the Road stuff, was trained and had a sort of cup of coffee on the Indies before he became a full time artist. So, and then Jerry on the cover,
Yeah, of
Jerry
course.
Lawler doing the covers and stuff. So
Can't
like
forget Jerry.
having actual wrestlers contribute to it, I think just adds to the authenticity of it, and that matters to me. I mean, it matters, when you care about something. Like I take a lot of it seriously because for a long time I was wrestling comics,
Yeah.
and for a long time I was the only person bringing wrestling to conventions. And I took, I would go to conventions and I'd be like, well, where's the wrestling? And I'd be upset, so like I take that seriously. I still have the only dedicated wrestling booth at San Diego Comic Con. I have the only wrestling booth in New York. So, I mean, I take my sort of stewardship of those things very, very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so when it comes to wrestling, what was it that kind of got you inspired to even begin to start, becoming a fan of it? I know you said you kind of mentioned, back in the day you'd watch WWE and kind of switch to Ring of Honor, but what kind of got you started on the wrestling path in the first place?
George the Animal Steel. I was,
Okay.
I was flipping through. I've always been a night owl. I've worked nights, lived at night. I'm just a night guy. And I
Yeah.
was very, very young, and I was flipping the channels, and the first Saturday night's main event was on, and the last match on the show was Iron Sheik, Nikolai Volkov, and George the Animal Steel against Barry Windham, Mike Rotunda, and Ricky Steamboat. And just seeing George the Animal Steel, he's got hair all over his body and his big, roll on his neck and his crazy, antics and stuff. I mean, unfortunately, I didn't realize I was looking into my future, but it is what it is. I mean, my
Yeah.
tongue's not green, but but
Yeah.
it was just I'd never seen anything like it, and I just at my age, I was captivated, and I probably watched wrestling in some form or another every day since.
That's awesome. Yeah, and a lot of people, you'll mention, you watch wrestling and oh yeah, I used to watch wrestling back in the day, but I kind of just fell off the bandwagon. But you don't really find that many people that are still kind of staying pretty staunch with it, especially now that there's so much more out there than just, WWE now.
I think it's different now. I think that even when I was younger, even when wrestling was cool, it wasn't cool.
Yeah.
Like
Oh
if
yeah.
the Hogan era, right? They're
Yeah.
selling tickets, they're selling out arenas. People are still making fun of you, even
Oh
in the
yeah.
Steve Austin era. Like,
Oh yeah.
I mean, I've always been sort of whatever, and I've never cared what anybody thinks.
Yeah.
So I just like what I like, and I've always liked what I liked.
Yeah.
And but now it's just so mainstream. It's on, it's because they never talked about it anywhere else, and now they'll mention it on ESPN or people talk about this. It's in uh, there's references to it in popular music. Like it used to just sort of be like this thing that existed by itself, and now,
Like a taboo thing that no one ever wanted to
yeah,
talk about. Like you enjoyed it in private, but you were never going to really talk about it with your friends.
and that's why I made Headlocked, like because I always sort of appreciated the art form, and I just felt like doing a story about a kid who's a theater major who falls in love with wrestling and drops out of college to chase his dream of becoming a wrestler, like everybody could kind of follow along his journey and sort of see what goes into it and also see the craft of wrestling through the eyes of a performance artist. And I've definitely sold the book to people who were not wrestling fans, and if nothing else they came away from it with a greater appreciation. Some people watch it now, and I've done the same thing with comics. Like I've been a ton of people's first comic book, and that's something I'm very proud of because a lot of times when you buy your first comic, it's I bought my first comic because I saw Captain America and Spider-Man fighting on the cover, and I thought I was like, oh wow, this is what's going on here. This is a thing that shouldn't happen. And so I bought it for Spider-Man. I didn't buy it for the creators or whatever. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
everybody that bought Headlock bought it from me, because of me. So like I take that as a big point of pride. I feel like I've brought a lot more people to comics than like once you're in the door, it's fine, right? But like nobody's like
Yeah,
all of a sudden like I'm gonna start reading comics because of Brian Michael Bendis, right?
right.
Like, you're gonna buy a Spider-Man book and then be like, oh, this guy's writing the hell out of this, so now I'm gonna read it. The
Yeah.
same way for me, right? Like Spider-Man got me in the door, and then like I fell in love with the Claremont X-Men, but I wouldn't have done that if it wasn't for Spider-Man. But so as far as Headlocked, I'm out there moving units to people that have never read comics before, and that's I take like I said, I'd say it's a real point of pride for me.
Yeah, as you should, and I mean, a lot of people, like we were saying, that they didn't really like to talk about it, even, in Steve Austin era when wrestling was cool, it really wasn't cool, because that's kind of about when I got in about during when the build up for Stone Cold versus Shawn Michaels, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, and that's kind of where I started coming into it because I was just flipping through the channels and I see this and I was like, holy shit, this is like comic books, but real life. This is amazing. And then, that's how I found WWE. And then, I found out WCW. They kind of just, I can just flip back and forth and see all this amazing wrestling. Like I was hooked after that. And, occasionally you'd find people at school who, would like it and then you could kind of talk to them about it. But, for the most part, people thought it was dumb. And I got made fun of too growing up because, wrestling is fake. Why do you like that stuff? And it's like, you try to explain it now and people understand it now, but they just didn't care back then because all the stuff that you're into, it's kind of the same thing. I mean, you you say, why do you watch this show? Well, I have favorite characters. I have characters that I don't like. I kind of want to see the story progress every week and see kind of where things go. Oh, what show you're watching? I'm watching pro wrestling. You could really fit that into any show if you think about it.
Oh yeah,
And I think a lot of people are just kind of scared to get into wrestling because, it's been so taboo for a long time. Like, I don't want to get caught with a wrestling magazine or a wrestling comic or whatever. And the same thing with comics, like comics are for nerds. I can't read a comic, so, it takes someone like you to kind of explain it in a way that it makes it interesting to the person where they're like, oh, wrestling can be that. Like, if I just take a minute to sit and, get past the whole wrestling's fake, wrestling's so stupid, blah blah blah, then wrestling's actually a really entertaining art form, and same with comic books.
it's funny that you mentioned the taboo part of it because we did a shirt at one point that we homaged the Green Lantern, Green Arrow cover. Only Speedy was reading wrestling comics instead of shooting heroin. And it's a Neil Adams cover, and we actually got Josh Adams to draw it, which is
That's
cool.
incredible.
But yeah, it's I don't know, it's interesting. I think and the thing that hooks everybody ultimately is a character for
Yeah.
whatever reason that and there was a period of time when characters weren't necessarily so prominent or they were so cartoony that they didn't fit. Like after the Hogan era, WWE kept trying to sort of, be like, oh, we got another wrestling cowboy and whatever, and like, and that wasn't the thing. Like that worked for a time, but then it didn't work, later. Whereas, once we got past the Austin era and everybody wanted it to be hyper realistic, and you had 100 guys in black boots and black tights just
Yep.
doing head drops and strikes. Guys like Orange Cassidy and Danhausen and Effie sort of brought character back to wrestling,
Yeah.
and obviously Bray Wyatt as well. Like, and then people, and that's to me that's what hooks people. When AEW first started wrestling, I had a number of lapsed wrestling fans that were like, I haven't watched wrestling in years. Who's this Orange Cassidy guy?
Yep.
And it's funny because then you have all the purists or whatever screaming about his gimmick, but the guy's bringing people to the table.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, with a lot of things, especially wrestling, if you don't like it, it's because maybe you just haven't found a character that you resonate with. For example, my oldest daughter, or everyone in my house hates wrestling, and they, they just groan every time I'm like, all right, I'm gonna watch wrestling for a little bit or whatever. But then, my oldest daughter, she for a while got into Day of the Dead. Um, and I'm like, hey, there's a wrestler that kind of paints her face like that. So I introduced her to Thunder Rosa and she was hooked. And then now, after Thunder Rosa, she's found all these other characters like, oh, hey, I like this character. She's starting to find more and more characters. It just takes that one character to hook you in and get you going.
Yeah, and that's it. Like it just takes a minute for, and so I have guys sometimes that reach out to me, wrestlers that'll ask me for character help, what kind of stuff do you see for me, or what can I do, whatever.
Yeah.
And I always tell people like you need you need to make people stop. And when they have like, especially like if people are scrolling, flipping channels, whatever, they're gonna see you and they've got like 10 second or a tenth of a second to decide if they're gonna stop.
Yeah.
So you got to know your visual, who you are visually, has to come across, right? Like when you see Bray Wyatt, you immediately know what he is,
Oh yeah.
right? Or the Hardy Boys or Steve Austin, like, Undertaker, right? Like the minute you see him. But like there's some guys, right, that are just, for lack of a better term, right? Or for Daniel Bryan is a very, plain looking guy.
Yeah.
Once you're in the door, you're like, holy cow, this guy's one of the greatest wrestlers I've ever seen.
Yep.
But he's not the guy that's going to make you stop the channel.
Yep.
And that's it, right? Like, so you need, you know what I mean? Like you need those guys that are channel stoppers.
Yeah.
And, those are going to be your more visually interesting characters. And then once they're in the door, then you can wow them with everything. You can wow them with your moves. You can wow them with your matches and whatever. But you got to get them. You got to get them to stop first. And
Yeah.
that's the trick. It's like the cover in a comic book, right? Like if you've never read like that's the thing that everybody sees first. If you're in the comic book store and you're walking through, who all the heroes are. You know who they all are by now. You know all the Marvel guys, all the DC guys, or whatever. And you're walking through like, and what's going to be the thing that makes you stop? You're like, oh, look at that cover, and then maybe you flip through it, and you're like, all right, maybe I'm going to buy this, and then next thing you know, right, like you're in, and now they got you, they're in your veins,
Yeah, for sure.
and then that's it. So,
And they always say don't judge a book by by its cover, but everybody does just because they
oh,
say to.
100%.
And like you said, you got to get something that'll grab you. And when you're mentioning Daniel Bryan, Brian Danielson, I like to think of other people that kind of fit in that same vein, like Claudio Castagnoli and Jonathan Gresham. They're incredible wrestlers, but like you said, they kind of just they don't they don't grab you and pull you in like the Brody King or the Danhausen or like you said, Orange Cassidy, Bray Wyatt. Those ones are the ones that kind of bring you to the show, and you keep
Mhm.
people there by bringing in all your super technical guys, kind of like your Brian Danielsons and all those guys like that.
Yeah, no, it's I mean that's the every and it's funny too because I always feel like people take the wrong lessons, right? Like
Yes.
Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair were all time characters,
Yep.
right? And but so many people just looked at Hulk Hogan and said, I got to lift weights.
Yep.
But like Hogan, Hogan without charisma is the Warlord, right? Like, I mean, why
Yep.
wasn't, in that case, why wasn't the Warlord the biggest star? And I mean, Warlord
Yeah.
was great, but I mean, he's not Hulk Hogan, right? And
Right.
everybody looked at Ric Flair and were like, oh, I'm going to do 300 false finishes in my matches now and whatever, instead of being like, oh, hey, this guy is an all time character. You
Yep.
know what I mean? Like people lost all, people took all the wrong lessons from things. But it all comes around. I mean, the cool thing is, there's a lot of people that are very derivative, and then you have those guys that are just sort of pushing the boundaries, and those are always going to be my favorite people. I mean, I like anybody that can do something. Like I feel like if you can do something everybody can do and you can do it the best, like that's obviously a huge thing. But like, you know what I mean? I'm a guy who carved his own niche. So like a guy like Danhausen, I have un you know just a ton of respect for. I mean, I knew him
Sure.
before he wore makeup, before he was that character, and I mean, no one's ever, he sort of made a character that transcended wrestling. I don't think anybody's ever done what he did,
I agree.
and that's I think that's definitely like those are the people that I don't know I gravitate to. Matt Cardona, who built
Oh
himself a
yeah.
whole niche. You know what
Oh
I
yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
those
Yeah.
guys, Effie, those guys that are grinders and they get it and they're out there just you know what I mean, reinventing themselves and building, building stuff on their own. Like I've got tons of respect for that.
Absolutely. For sure. Now, speaking of all these colorful characters, a lot of people don't know, you've mentioned it a couple times before, but you've got your Headlocked series, which is a series of wrestling comics that you usually do collaborations with other wrestlers. And, that's something that I always use because I'm not currently, but I used to be a very avid subscriber to Pro Wrestling Crate. And it was always, The shirts are always super great, but it always made my month when I had my copy of Headlock Comics in there. And I remember I would always post them on Instagram and I would tag you and you would always be really cool to comment. But it's like that's kind of where I started getting to know you, other than, the big headlines from Jerry Lawler, being your cover artist, which is still super incredible. But um reading all of these Headlock comics, it's really cool how you work with all these wrestlers to create these stories. You've got a wide plethora of characters where you've got superheroes, secret agents, super spies, detectives. When you come up with let me back up. When you go to create these stories, are these pretty collaborative with, the specific wrestler that you're working with? Do they come to you with the idea? How do those kind of work out?
Every collaboration is different. Some guys have very specific ideas. Sometimes we just sit down and just jam on something. Sometimes, I had done a story with Rob Van Dam, and then I was at a convention with Rob Van Dam. Just we were next to each other, and we were just kind of talking shit and whatever. And then like we just came up with this other idea to do this. We ended up doing is a Reefer Madness riff, but it wasn't about drugs. It was about high spots. So it was about a kid
Yeah.
and his having his first match, and he always doing tackle, drop down, whatever. And then like he leaves, and there's like this long haired kid outside, be like, "Hey man, do you get high?" And he's like, "Getting high is for losers." And they're out in the woods, and there's just kids doing moonsaults in a ring and whatever. And and
Yeah.
it was too good of an idea. I was like, "Oh, we got to do another one." Like it was too good of an idea to not. So I mean, like that one happened real organically. Sometimes I'll sit down with people and at a convention, at a restaurant, at a bar, whatever, and we'll just riff until we come up with something. So it's just it's different for everybody. Some of them want to Mick Foley wrote a whole pro story for me to adapt, which was way too big. Like
Yeah.
that's the hardest thing, is getting people who've never written comics to understand sort of real estate in comics and how that works. Like 12 pages isn't a ton of room. So
Yeah.
we can't, we've got to come up with these like sort of quick, stories. We can't do, an epic. Um, but yeah, so it's different for everybody. And some people come to me, some people I approach, but it's sort of the best part of the job is jamming creatively with people that you respect as creators. And I love that.
That's very cool. Yeah, you've worked with some of my most favorite wrestlers in the world, and it's very cool that you get to know these guys on a personal level. I see all the pictures from conventions where you're hanging out with these guys, especially your San Diego Comic-Con booth weekend. That would have been, I've never been, but this last one would be one that I would have totally loved to go to just because, Danhausen, Brody King, Matt Cardona, all those guys would be so cool to meet in person.
Yeah, it's San Diego. I love, man. I love the vibe there. I love the energy. And it's funny because I always listen to comics people complain that it's not for comics anymore or whatever, and I
Yeah.
vehemently disagree. It's the Super Bowl of comics,
Yeah.
and and all these guys show up to the Super Bowl or whatever. It's the WrestleMania of comics, and they
Okay.
show up to the WrestleMania with their house show shit.
Yeah.
And like that's it, right? Like you can do that stuff in East Bumble Comic Con, but like you're in San Diego, right? You got to show up to compete, and I show up to compete every year. Brian Polito shows up to compete. I mean, the guys that do it. I'm in the indie section, right? So I'm next to God damn, I can't remember his name now. That's upsetting. But Brian Polito's across from me. Billy Tucci's across the aisle. You know what I mean? And like we show up and we show up to play, and then some people just kind of put their books on a table and sit there looking at their phone, and they wonder why they're not why they're not doing stuff. And
Yeah.
I would rather take a chance and market my stuff to 125,000 pop culture fans than 500 people in a ballroom in a Holiday Inn, which is what Comic Cons used to be. And I think some people would rather go back to that and just be the big fish in the little pond. But I'd much rather. I like it how it is now. I just think that you're competing with everybody anyway. So who cares if it's at a con, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like a I don't know. It's I can sell to anybody, um, and I think you can. I think I think if somebody's at a Comic Con, they are a viable customer, even if they're there for cosplay, if they're there for whatever. Like you have a chance to sell to them, and I think you got to do it. And that's why I always try to make sure that my New York and San Diego experiences are, you know, worth the trip.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I like your comparison. You can't bring your house show shit to WrestleMania. That's not a lot of people are going to understand that reference, but that makes a lot of sense.
It drives me nuts because I've heard it for years.
Yeah.
I've watched guys pull out and be like, "Oh, nobody wants comics anymore." I'm like, you're just not marketing them right.
Well, yeah,
Like,
with that attitude, no one's going to want your comic book.
yeah.
Because I
And I
mean,
see it. I mean, I watch older guys get bitter about cosplayers. There's always somebody to blame, right? There's the cosplayers, and then there's this and there's that, whatever. Like I partner with cosplayers to do stuff, right? Like you just it's just I don't know. Some people just don't have the mindset, and that's what you got to do. I mean, and
yeah.
I have no problem telling anybody in comics this. It hasn't always made me super popular with people, but it's fine. It's what people need to hear.
Yeah, but I mean, like you said, if you go into Comic-Con or, any con really, thinking I'm not going to do well, you're not going to do well. I mean, because you've already been defeated before you even get there. So, and if you're not, overhyping yourself, you got no one else is going to hype you up. I mean, you've got to be your biggest fan, you've got to be your biggest cheerleader. And
Yeah.
if you come in with the attitude of, well, no one wants comic book, well, of course no one's going to want your comic book because you got a super negative attitude about it.
I mean, listen, I've had rough cons. I've absolutely had rough
Sure,
cons. I've had
sure.
cons where I didn't sell a lot. I had cons where I was rejected a lot. And
Yeah,
that happens, but I win way more than I lose. And I was at a first time show in North Dakota this weekend, and it was a great show, but it's a first time show,
yeah,
and they don't necessarily have the attendance that a more established con would have, and I think they will because it was. I mean, for a first time show, they did great.
yeah.
But you know, I still I still got my I still made my sales. There's a lot of people that had never been to a con before, never been to a comic book store before. They just came to check it out. You know what I mean? I sold my Vampiro book to people that had never owned a comic book in their life because they like the pitch. And they're like, "Oh, I'll check it out. I'm here." You know what I mean? But like that's it. You just got to find ways to engage with people. I mean, the other thing that people forget to consider is that comic book, traditionally, right? And I count myself among them, but a lot of comic book fans are very introverted,
Yeah.
somewhat awkward sometimes, ADHD up the wazoo, riddled with
Mhm.
anxiety. I mean, you know, so sometimes people don't know how to engage or, whatever. So it's also up to you to sort of, I've had to learn a lot of different sort of mechanisms to how to engage people in not a like a boorish like selly way, but just and it's fine. Like honestly, like I like being among my people. So you know what I mean? Like if people just want
Yeah,
to come up and talk about wrestling, that's fine. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
obviously I want to sell you something, but if I don't, we can still have a good conversation. And that's cool, We can exchange high fives. I love high fiving people. I love when people bring their dogs to my table. It's the best. I was doing a show in Des Moines and I was running a little bit late and I got to the show like 5 minutes after the doors open and there was somebody at my table. I'm like, all right, somebody's here to make a sale. And then I look and they're like, our dog's name is Kingston and we thought that you should meet. And I was like, all right, this is great.
That's awesome.
And then over the rest of the show, like three other people brought their dogs to my booth. So big ups to Des Moines for doing it right.
That's awesome. And just because the people will come by to kind of chat with you or whatever, you know, chances are, and I'm sure you probably had this before, where someone came to you with no intention to buy anything. They just wanted to shoot the shit. They talk to you for a while, they leave, and maybe they come back and buy a book because
Yeah,
and it has nothing to do with the fact they're even into comics or even into wrestling. It's just the fact that you're such a nice guy, you're such a personable guy. And like you said, yeah, it's hard because, a lot of comic book fans, like you said, are introverted or shy, have ADD. I know, I mentioned it before where, like I said, I've been a big fan of yours for a long time, but I was too afraid to reach out to even try to talk to you
sure.
or say anything. So, but then I finally am like, you know what? You just got to get over that fear and just do it. So that's I
Right.
think a lot of thing that people are doing is, maybe they want to buy something from you. They're just scared by coming by and starting that conversation up and that kind of I guess in a way like an icebreaker kind of thing. It kind of warms them up a little bit. And they're like, all right, I've met this guy, I could talk to him. Now I can come up and buy his stuff.
And I mean, obviously I want to make money, but also I just more than anything else, I just want my life to not be boring.
Yeah,
And I love meeting new people, and I love going to new places. I'm going to Wisconsin this weekend for the Madison Comic and Toy Expo. It's
that's
first
cool.
time, another first time show. I've never been to Wisconsin. I had never been to North Carolina or North Dakota or Montana.
Nice.
So like, I'm hitting all these states I've never been to. I'm meeting all these different people, just seeing the world. And it's because I make comic books in my bedroom. Like I don't sell my books in comic book stores. I mean, I'm about to, but I generally, I've done like direct to consumer for years and whatever, and that's worked for me. But like, I don't even exist to a lot of people in comics because I don't, make superheroes and don't put my stuff through Diamond and any of that stuff. But
Yeah,
it's, you know, I've been able to do a lot of great things. I got to go to Australia and pet koalas with Bret Hart. I mean,
so awesome.
what are you gonna, like, how are you ever gonna top that? Like,
Right?
I don't. Well, there's probably nobody else in the world that's ever done that in the
Yeah.
history of humanity. I mean, maybe, but I mean, Bret Hart and I pet the same koala at the same time. Like we were the Hart Foundation of petting koalas.
That's awesome.
So I mean, and like I said, I mean that's all of that. I grew up poor. I didn't go anywhere for a long time, and to be able to do the things that I do and experience the things that I've been able to experience because I make comic books about wrestling is, I mean, I will never not. I will never take that for granted.
That's awesome. So I want to move on, but before I do, I want to ask, and I want to ask not who your favorite collaboration has been because I'm sure, I don't want to cause any issues and have you pick favorites, but what I want to ask is there someone that you haven't been a wrestler that you haven't had the chance to collaborate with yet, but you would really like to collaborate with this person?
Hmm.
It can be one, it can
I
be a
mean,
couple, just whatever.
honestly, like, there's a ton of people in WWE that I was supposed to collaborate with, but I just I do what I can do. You know what I mean? I still work full time. For a long time I was managing warehouses and high volume warehouses and stuff while I was doing this. So like everything kind of happens as it happens.
Yeah.
And then, so like there was that period of time in 2016 when WWE started just signing everybody off the indies. Like I lost a ton. Like I had Nakamura lined up to do one.
Oh
Like I
wow.
would have had, I would have, I mean, I know Kevin Owens forever. I would have had Kevin Owens, Shayna
Yeah.
Baszler. You know, I I lost out on a ton. I was supposed to do something with Jade in the last book, and then she went to WWE. Like I miss out on a lot of things because I'm small and I'm a small operation and things don't move as fast as I'd like. And then obviously everything costs money. So like it's not like I can do 20 projects at a time. Like you kind of gotta take it as it goes. So like I'm very subject to the whims of like what everybody else does, right? Like here's a perfect example. I know I'm getting off topic here,
No, you're
but
good.
I had my panel for this year and I had a lot of stuff I wanted to announce. I was excited about it the week before and I've got it set at a time where I feel like nobody's going to mess with it. I'm far enough away from the AEW panel that it shouldn't be a problem, and I'm far away enough from the WWE panel and whatever. And then the week before, Marvel drops the Wolverine Deadpool screening, and the doors open right when my panel starts.
Oh,
So I lost like a dozen
yeah.
people at least that told me personally they were going to come to my panel, and now they're not.
Oh
And
man.
it is whatever. It's fine. And then the morning of San Diego Comic Con, WWE blocked me off of a project that I had set up. Um, and then later that day, AEW ran a surprise signing against my panel. So like, I can do whatever. And I mean, I'm no, you know what I mean. No one's thinking about me, right? Like I'm small potatoes. Like they're just doing what they're doing. But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I liken it to being like I'm like a it's like Pacific Rim, right? And there's monsters and robots fighting in the water. I'm just this
Yeah.
guy in the little boat trying not to get squashed. But like, everybody makes choices. I spent, a good 2 months planning my panel and trying to get everything together and working like nonstop. And then I probably lost half of my attendance, the day before. And there's nothing I could do about it. You know what I mean? I did everything I could to prevent what happened happening, but I mean, there's nothing I could do to fully prevent it because they just, they just people just make big moves, and then all of a sudden you're sort of at that mercy. So
Yeah.
it's but whatever. I digress. Paul Heyman is somebody I would love to make comics with.
That would be cool. And yeah,
I
you mentioned
met
Kevin.
him a bunch of times. He's an extremely seductive man. Like the way he talks to you. Like I remember the first time I met him was at San Diego Comic Con, and he was
Yeah.
there with Jeff Katz and his stuff, and he was with Samoa Joe, who at that time I had known. And Joe waved me over, and I went over to, and I said, "Hey, Mr. Heyman, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm a big fan." And he just took my hand in his hands. He's like, "Oh no, the pleasure is all mine." And it's such a very
The boss
real
move.
response to that, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's a very cliched response, but the way he said it, like I would have bought a car from him at that moment. Like, just I was like, "Are you the devil?" Like he might be. Like like you just it was impressive. But yeah, Paul Heyman's
Yeah.
definitely a guy. I would definitely love to do something with Swerve. I would definitely love. I had a collaboration set up with Bray Wyatt that we were going to try to do. Well, first I had written a Fiend found footage comic book story,
Oh
and I
man.
pitched it to Boom, and Boom turned it down. Which to this day, like Bray loved it. Like to this day, I'll never understand the choice that was made there.
Wow.
And then when he was between his stints in WWE, we had talked about doing some stuff, and he seemed like he was going to do it, And then obviously Vince got kicked out. Triple H came in, and all those guys went back. So like I had a really cool story lined up with Johnny and Candice. Whatever. I've lost out on a ton of things over the years for all the cool stuff that I've made. I was supposed to do a story with Roddy Piper, and he died 6 days before we could put it together.
Man.
Um, Ultimate Warrior was supposed to paint a cover for my book. He was a painter, and a lot of people didn't know that,
Oh
but
wow.
he was supposed to paint a cover to my book, and we had a long conversation. He actually called me on my birthday one day, which was kind of amusing. Like, not that he knew it was my birthday. He just
Right,
happened to
right.
call me on my birthday, just
Yeah.
telling me to stay positive about my project. And I was like, I feel like I'm like 9 years old. Like the Ultimate Warrior just called me to tell me to stay positive.
Yeah, that's
Um,
awesome.
so I've had like you could I mean, for a guy that doesn't exist to a lot of people, like you could write a whole book about my experiences and some of the crazy stuff that I've seen and done and been a part of and whatnot. So
That's really unfortunate, but really cool. There's, yeah, so many potential cool stories in there. So I want to talk about your newest collaboration with the man, the myth, the legend, Vampiro, with your new book that's coming out next month, Vampiro Rockabilly Apocalypse. So for the people that don't know, let's talk a little bit about that.
so I was given I've been friends with Kevin Kleinrock from Master Republic for a long time. We split some space at conventions and stuff, and I've always had a great respect. He's a grinder, just like me, and I've always been impressed with what he's been able to accomplish. And we're always kind of trying to find the right project to work on. Um, and so he had mentioned Vampiro, and I was like, oh, I'd super love to do Vampiro. And at the time, he was hosting a punk and rockabilly radio show in Mexico that was very popular, and they wanted to do something rockabilly, but there was no real precedent for it. So they said, Rockabilly Vampiro, make me a pitch. And, I've been making wrestling comics for years, but obviously I've read comics my whole life and watched movies and whatever. And
Yeah.
I've always had ideas for things that maybe wouldn't have fit into what I do. And I've been stocking them up for 15 years. And then all of a sudden, I had this opportunity to write like something that's a much more traditional comic book type story, a genre thing. And I was like, all right, well, let's get weird. And I put all the craziest stuff that I could put into it. And they were like, oh, yeah, this is great. And so, we've partnered with a couple of different people, some partners we haven't been able to announce yet, but obviously Massive is publishing it, and they've been an excellent partner to partner with. and it's the most fun I've had writing anything. And I think if people give it a shot, I think they'll like it. As always, I think my big concern is just people being aware of what we're doing, and that we exist.
That's awesome. Now, how much input, if you got any at all, did you get from Vampiro himself, or has he read the book? Has he talked to you about it at all?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I ran the whole pitch by him. He's interjected some stuff, and then the main thing was basically sort of putting that character into this world. And Vamp is a he's a very, very cool guy. Like, he's got like an insane amount of like sort of personal charisma, and it's just interesting. Like, he's into like weird stuff, like occult stuff and whatever. So
Yeah.
like, we've definitely talked about future stuff. And he's had some input into this, but this was mostly about getting his sort of personality right for the comic book page,
Yeah.
and sort of putting his swagger and whatever into this story and into this world.
Very cool. Yeah, I think you definitely, I've read the first issue and I think you definitely nailed it right off the bat. So I'm excited to see where it goes. So I
It's weird.
I said perfect. And we're all about weird around here. So, I noticed that it's, there's going to be a 5 issue run. Um, are you guys planning on anything more after that? Is it gonna wrap up the story as to 5 issues, or what do
So
you?
the arc's going to be 10 issues,
Okay.
but we'll probably have a break in between 5 and 6. Put out a trade or whatever, I think, but it'll be it's a double sized. It was originally written to be 12 issues, then they wanted to do 10, double size first, double size last. So we do the big intro, we do the big finish, and then we hit all the crazy in between.
Very cool. And it's coming out October, I think it was the 12th,
16th,
16th.
I believe. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, the final order cutoff is at the end of this week, the September 15th. I don't know when you're going to put this up, but it's, for if you want to ensure that you get a copy. Um, the cool thing is, one of the things that I'm super, super excited about is the cover. We got Rafael Galor, who is to me, a legend in Mexico, painted all the Frazetta style fantasy covers for the Lucha Mags. And then he did the first two covers, and then we've got Picasso, who's the other guy who did these things, and did the covers for 3 and 4, and then Galore is going back to 5, and we'll alternate between them. But Picasso, I think, still paints regularly, but I mean, Galore hasn't done anything in forever, and I mean, his cover is insane, and it's like I said, the cover is an important part of getting people on board for stuff.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, I love this cover to death. Um, and the cover to number 2, we introduce uh, one of my favorite antagonists that I've probably ever created. It's a motorcycle gang of nuns called the Bad Habit, and they're hunting Vampiro. They've got shotguns and stuff. And the just to if people want a taste of the weird, that's that's a big they're the first well the after issue 1 they're the next big antagonist, and they're a lot of fun. They're a lot of fun to write, um, to sort of do this sort of holy sons of anarchy kind of thing or
Yeah.
whatever. Um, and The cover for number 3 is Picasso's first cover on the series, and I don't know. I don't want to say I'd eat my hat if it doesn't win an Eisner, but uh, it's incredible.
That's awesome.
There's, I mean, and that's all, and it's cool to have. It's cool to have that, right? Like, you've got the support of Vampiro, who is, one of the most legendary wrestlers in Mexico. In Mexico,
Yeah.
he toured with the Misfits for a while. Like,
Mhm.
I mean, the dude's lived like 1,000 lives already,
Yeah.
and like, you've got the support of him, and then you've got these masters, and then I haven't even talked about Napalm yet, who does the art, the interior art. He's got such a nice kinetic style, and like, between the guitar playing and the action and the cars. I mean, there's a lot of, I always describe the book to people as Preacher meets Cannonball Run.
Okay, yeah, I get
There's
that.
a lot of vehicle stuff. There's a lot of cars, a lot of fighting on the highway and stuff. And he's just killing it with the art. So it's he's the perfect artist for it, and I don't know. I feel like we're really starting to hit on all cylinders, and I think we're making. I don't know. I mean, and obviously I'm biased. I
Sure.
I don't. It's always hard for me to really love my work per se. I think every creative feels like that, but I'm very happy with what we're putting out right now.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, like you mentioned the interiors, I really like it. It's kind of like a cartoony style that I really, really like. I've got an artist friend. His name is Fish Lee. Shout out to Mr. Fish. He does a very similar cartoony art style that I really,
Mm.
really enjoy. And man, that cover is like the old school van art. It's so badass.
Yeah. No, I know. I wish I could buy like an RV and just spray paint it on the side or
Yeah,
airbrush it on the side, I guess. But
that
yeah,
that drew
it's
me
cool, man. I've been really, really lucky. I think like sometimes everything kind of comes together in just the right way, and I literally just got the cover to number 4 today, and it's unbelievable.
in. That's
Um,
awesome.
it's so unsettling, um, and it's I don't know. Yeah, I guess as a writer, right? Like you're only as good as your collaborators, and
For sure.
and Jacob Baskell is doing the lettering and the effects on it and stuff, and he's been with me since almost the very, very beginning. He's the person I've collaborated with the most. He's lettered and designed almost every Headlock book, Tales from the Road, almost everything that I've done, through myself. And he's uh he's really stepped his game up to another level. Like he's designed just some of the coolest stuff. Like and it's funny because you don't necessarily think about it as a thing, but even some of the ads that he put together are really, really cool. And you're just like, oh man, like I'm lucky to be around such talented people.
For sure. Yeah, and I want to go back and retroact a mistake I made earlier. I forgot to mention Tales of the Road. I don't know why I said Headlock for
That's fine.
the comic that came in all the pro wrestling crates. It was Tales from the Road. I was always very much looking forward to my issue of Tales of the Road. Tales from the Road. This is very cool.
Yeah, it's understandable.
That's a
For a
very
long time, it was branded as Headlock Tales from the Road, and now I've just sort of dropped the headlock part of it just to make it, I don't know, take up less space on the cover.
that works. All right, man. So what else you got coming down the pike that you are able to talk about that you want to talk about?
Um, our next book coming out to Kickstarter probably in a couple of weeks is called Friday Night Bigfoot, and it's about a promoter in Portland in 1985 who trains Bigfoot to wrestle. Um, I did a story with Gangrel in the volume 1 of Tales from the Road, and we just did like a little 6-page story. And then every time we talk, we just shoot out more ideas and just talk about stuff and just have so much fun with it. I was like, yeah, we got to make this a series.
Oh man.
So I've actually sort of pulled it out of like most of the idea of the Tales from the Road stuff is just sort of set in the Headlock universe.
Yeah.
We sort of pulled it out of the Headlock universe, and we're just telling this sort of uh, this story of this promoter, and it's in 1985, and you've got the big national promotion sort of pushing him out and whatever, and he stumbles upon Bigfoot and then trains Bigfoot to wrestle, and everybody thinks it's the guy in a suit, but it's really Bigfoot, and we get Bigfoot hooked on coke, and it's pretty fucked up.
That's awesome.
So um,
It's like a Tales from the Road pit stop.
yeah, so we've got some cool merch design for it. We've got incredible covers. Andy Bollinger did a cover. So Tony Gregori's doing the art. He's doing Rick and Morty for IDW right now. He did some of those Lucha Underground comics before. He's a big wrestling fan. He's a great artist. He also did our Powerhouse Hobbs Tales from the Road
Oh
in
yeah, yeah, yeah.
volume three of Tales from the Road. And but he's doing the interiors, and he did a cover. Maria Wolf did a cover that I love. I think she's the best cover artist. This is definitely on the Mount Rushmore for me right now. Like she just makes incredible stuff. Andy Bollinger and Will Robson did a incredible Bigfoot Ultimate Warrior kind of shaking the ropes cover.
That's
That
fantastic.
yeah, the cover's gonna blow people's minds. The story's a lot of fun. I've had and I'm very excited to get this one off the ground. And then I'm working on Tales from the Road Volume 4. Shelton Benjamin is on that. Shelton Benjamin, Jordan Grace, it's a new Danhausen story.
Nice.
I've had some other. I've got enough content to do 4 and 5. I'm just trying to sort out what's going in what book. Um,
Gotcha.
and I've had some other people kind of pop in. There's always just people in and out. Where somebody like might be a possibility. It's whatever, but and then I have 2 big license things that I can't talk about that should be out soon. One of them is going to be probably the biggest thing I've ever done, and then the other one is tied to the 5th volume of Headlocked.
Nice.
Um, so yeah, I've got more work than I can shake a stick at. And it's hard because, like I said, I still work full time. I haven't had a day off from work in a year and a half. I've worked every single day. I work remotely, so when I'm at San Diego Comic Con after the show, like I'm in my hotel room doing stuff. Whatever I did, I've worked from Australia, I've worked from Albuquerque, I've worked from Alaska. Um, and then I do everything that's not art. So I'm wrangling wrestlers, I'm wrangling artists, I'm editing and doing all my convention travel. I mean, I'll probably hit close to 30 shows this year, I think. And Yeah, I mean, I'm just running all the time, but it's the happiest I've ever been. Just making the things that I want to make and getting to create with people that I respect. Um, I just got a cover today for my one of my unmentionable projects from Robbie Rodriguez that is unbelievable. Um,
Very cool.
Daniel Warren Johnson also did a cover for that particular project.
Oh man.
Um,
So cool.
and Jill Thompson is going to be contributing one. Andy's doing a cover for it. So it's uh it's wild. It's cool to like I never try to lose sight of where I started and where I'm at,
Yeah.
and you know also where you want to be. I mean, but we're definitely making the stuff that I want to make with the people I want to make it with, and that's really all you can ever ask for. I mean,
Yeah.
anybody who's trying to get into comics to get rich is obviously it's a fool's errand, right? You're in it for the love, and I love what I'm doing. I love who I'm working with, and I can't wait for people to see some of the stuff that we've been able to put together.
That's very cool. I'm super stoked. Now, before I let you go, I always like to try to ask my guests to share a bit of advice for fellow creatives. So what kind of advice do you have to share?
The best thing, and this isn't for creatives. This is for people that want to be creative,
Okay.
but they're afraid. I do a panel a lot of times about making your own comic books and stuff like that.
Mhm.
You have to give yourself permission to suck. You're gonna suck when you start. Like every creative looks at their first works and like, oh my god, I can't believe I did that. But at the time when you made it, you're like, oh my god, I love it.
Yeah.
Like, but it's you have to give yourself. You People come up to me all the time and they're like, oh, I had an idea for this comic or that comic, but like, the thing I always hear the most is I had an idea for The Walking Dead. Right? I had a comic just like The Walking Dead, but then they did it right. And listen, Walking Dead's a great comic. I had them all on that bookshelf right there. But it ain't Shakespeare. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like somebody else could have made a compelling idea like that. That's not like one of those things. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's a very simple concept, but he did it first and he did it great. You know what I mean? But like so he got in the door and he did it so good, he kind of pulled the ladder up behind everybody because you can't top that. But
Yeah.
like but he did it first. You know what I mean? Like and that's it. It's just doing it, man. Like it's just doing it. And like it sucks because everybody I know is riddled with anxiety and imposter syndrome and all that stuff. And I go through it too. I mean,
Yeah.
I, you know, but you just you got to understand, like you got to give yourself permission to fail. and permission to not be great. And that's the only way you're ever going to be great. You know what I mean? Like Michael Jordan
Yeah.
didn't start shooting baskets and was hitting 100% from when he was 8 years old. Like
Yeah.
it's what I mean. People don't see it,
Yeah.
and I think it's hard, to put yourself out there for judgment. But I would tell you that you know I am not a young man, but making comics, this is the greatest joy of my life. Um, it's brought me so many places, and it's taken me so many places, and introduced me to so many people. You know, I spent 45 minutes in a green room talking about Andre the Giant with Carrie Elways. Like,
That's awesome.
how you know what I mean? Like, how cool is
Yeah.
that, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just because I made, and I mean, you can't get any more sort of low tech than me. Like, I'm not, you know what I mean? You can't get any more not in comics than I am. So it's doable, right? Like all you got to
Yeah.
do is just make your thing and find your audience, right? Like,
For sure.
and then you're good, man. Just get out there and do it, and don't be afraid. And I always tell people, if you're a creative and you got questions, or if you think you want to make comics or whatever, I try to keep myself open to that. I'm the guy, I'm on the end of all my social media. So if people have questions, I always encourage people to reach out. Um, that's one of the other things that I'm super super prideful about is the number of people that have come to me and said that because of advice I gave them or because of the example I said or whatever, that they make comics now. And
That's
that's you know that's a really cool feeling to think that just sort of by existing that you've helped change somebody else's life.
for sure. Yeah, that's really good advice, because a lot of people will think they have a really good idea. And I mean, been guilty of this myself where I'll think I have a really good idea and like, oh, someone else did it. So I guess I can't do that now. And like, that's not true. Just because they did it already before you doesn't mean you still can't because nobody can tell. I mean, all the stories that are ever going to be told have been told. And the difference is no one can tell it the way you do. Like for
Sure.
example, I've been writing a series that I got very inspired by from the comic series Astro City. I think it's a
Oh my god, I love Astro City so
I
much.
I love it so much, and so
Oh my god.
I was very inspired to me and my former friend we started making up all these characters and we started telling our own stories within this world that we made up, and you know we're not friends anymore, but I've kind of started to, I still love the project so much. I kind of want to reboot it with at least the ones that I came up with. So I've been kind of relaunching that extremely slowly, but it's something I
Mhm.
love writing. It's super exciting. And yeah, just, it's already been done, but it's kind of weird because not a lot of people will tell a story where your main character is a place, it's not a person. But,
Mhm.
it's cool because you got all these stories that take place, whether they're superheroes or they're, supervillains or even just regular people. A couple of my most favorite stories are, in that series are characters that don't have any powers at all. And it's just kind of just how people would interact with these people. We kind of took it as kind of like how would the regular people in like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, how would they act it's from the perspective of them, kind of how it would be having superpowered people in the world. So
Yeah,
that's kind of where we write it from, which is kind of an interesting concept that, again, has been done before, but it's not been done by everybody. So it's kind
correct.
of a cool way to kind of interact and, tell a new story.
I think, like I said, if you're making something with enthusiasm, like you can't go wrong.
Yep,
I
absolutely.
mean, I don't know, but yeah, that's always I do these panels to try to get people excited about making comics, and it always leaves me pumped up too. So
I
it's
mean, if they always say if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life.
well, that's not true. I mean, making comics is brutal. It is brutal, brutal work,
Yeah.
but I don't feel it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's just one of those things. I had this discussion with somebody the other day that is currently in a job that they don't like, and there's like it's all encompassing, and it's just something I don't have the passion for, and that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, because nobody in their right mind would go into comics. I mean, right? Like from every, it's a bad idea from every conceivable angle. It'd be like, oh, high overhead, low price point, right? Like businessmen are like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like it's. I mean, it's truly something that you got to do because you love it,
Sure.
and that's it. That's all I want to do is just make comics. I mean, if somebody makes them into movies or whatever, that's great, whatever. But whatever. I just want to make comics.
There you
And the
go.
last thing I'll ever forget, I think when I'm older, I guess, because I'm already old, but like, is the smell of that first box of my books that I opened up. I can remember opening it up and just sort of seeing that cover and holding it, and it was unbelievable.
Yep. I It's a wonderful thing. All right, man. So, before I let you go, let's give you a minute to plug yourself, plug where can people find you? Where can, people order the book? Where can we stay up to date on stuff that's coming from you?
All of my stuff is Headlocked Comic. It's one word. It's on my socials. It's my website. If you want to order some books, we have a Substack that I'm horrible about updating, but I'm going to have to be better about it. And yeah, I mean that's all me. Um, and Massive Publishing has a spot on their website where you can pre-order Vampiro Rockabilly Apocalypse #1. Get the cover you want. We've got some really dope covers. In addition to Galore, Napalm did a sort of a lucha movie poster cover that is unbelievable. And he's actually been trying to do something different with every cover. He's doing a variant for every issue, and his variants are insane.
That's cool.
Um, but yeah, so yeah, you can get it there. I would highly recommend it. I mean, if you're not somebody that regularly goes to comic stores, whatever, you can just pre-order from the website. The first book is 48 pages. It's $5. It's a hell of a deal.
That's a hell of a
So,
deal for sure.
um, step in, check it out. It's like I said, man. It's if you like Dust Till Dawn, if you wanted to go to like a midnight screening at a grindhouse theater with a big box of popcorn and a smile on your face, like that's the experience I'm trying to give people when they read Rockabilly Apocalypse.
Yeah, if you like supernatural vibes, you like vampires, definitely check this book out. Even if you're not a wrestling fan, it doesn't matter because this book is incredible. So definitely check it out. And I'll make sure we put the links in the show notes, let everyone know where they can go find it, and we'll make sure we get it out there.
Awesome.
So for me, I want to thank Polygon Horizon. Their song Pizza Force is the song I use for the show. Go check them out on Bandcamp. They're a great band. You can find the show Fueled by Weird on Instagram and Facebook. You can shoot me an email at fueledbyweird@gmail.com. And you can find this interview and all sorts of other great interviews with awesome creators on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. And now you can find me on the Spotlight Media GA app, along with the rest of the Stay Weird Network shows, the Nerdy Manroom Show with Hassel and Monster, Hassel's Review, and Big Rob's House of Entertainment and No Chinese Food. Now, the Stay Weird Network, it's a brand new podcast network dedicated to bringing some awesome back to the internet. Check us out on YouTube at Stay Weird Media, and check us out also at Instagram at the same handle. And you can email us at stayweirdmedia@gmail.com for any questions, comments, or anything like that. And I want to also thank my sponsor, The Zone Collectibles in Tifton, Georgia, your one-stop shop for comics, collectibles, and so much more. If you like this show, please leave a review and tell your friends because word of mouth is my friend. And remember, kids, life's too short to be normal, so stay weird. Mike, thanks so much for hanging out with me tonight.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. It was fun.
Absolutely.